Welcome and welcome back. I don't know voices very well. I'm being directed, I think, to do something. I'm good. All right. So we're happy to have you here. Happy to have you back. My name is Vivian Bruce Conger. I'm a member of the Humanities Curriculum Committee. So I guess I get to take some pride and ownership of this class a little bit.
Excuse me.
And the committee's really happy to bring you today's session. First things first, you heard this last week, you'll hear it for the next two sessions after this. If you'd please take out your cell phone and turn them off, or do not disturb, turn the volume down, something so it doesn't ring in the middle of the presentation. Although Jim was teaching long enough that he's probably used to phone calls in the middle of a class lecture. As much as you tell students they can't have their phones out, they have their phones out, so. And also welcome to the crowd joining us via Zoom in the HASP virtual classroom. And our special thanks to our course technician today, David Bratt, for supporting our hybrid modality. Now, that's the second time I've said that phrase, and it doesn't roll off the tongue easily, I gotta say. If you have questions or comments to pose, either at the end or Jim will, as he did last time, stop and open the floor up to questions. When that happens, if you would just wait for me to bring a microphone to you, I'll get to you as soon as I can, and I'll get to you in the order I see you or someone says that way. So one new announcement from last week. If you are new or returning to HASP or just curious to learn a bit more, you are invited to a new member orientation information session on Thursday, February 1st. I guess that's this week. At 1 o'clock in the HASP classroom to learn more about HASP and its peer-led committee structure directly from its current leaders. You can ask questions, you can get involved, you can explore membership benefits and meet other new members. And just a little incentive, as HASP always is good about doing, snacks and drinks will be provided. So this is our second session of Is de Tocqueville's America Ours? And today, session 2, will discuss Tocqueville's perceived dangers of democracy and his proposed solutions to those democracies. We had a great time last week. Lots of good questions, a lot of nice discussion, and this topic should generate even more, actually. I'm fascinated to learn about the dangers and the solutions. Our presenter is Dr. James Bratt. I won't go through quite as much as I did last week. How many of you are new here today? Everyone was here last? Oh, all right, good. Well, then I will do this. So in terms of his academic work, Dr. Bratt got his BA from Calvin in 1971, his PhD from Yale in 1978. He taught religious studies at the University of Pittsburgh from 1978 to 1987, and history at Calvin from 1987 to when he retired in 2016. His main publishing interests, that is Dutch Calvinism and Abraham Kuyper. Did I say that right?
Yeah, you got it. Good. Yeah.
I don't do Dutch well. Grew from his Dutch Reform background, but his principal teaching interests have been early America and American religious and intellectual history. And his current writing project is 1843. American Religion in the Year That Christ Did Not Return, which is always a fascinating title to me. So without further ado, Jim, it's
Yeah.
all yours.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah. So, yeah, Tocqueville's Democracy in America, based on a tour in 1830-31, published in 2 volumes, 1835 and 1840. This is right in my area of current research interest. And, but I'm fascinated by him because he gives us a window into his world, the world of the 1830s. It also raises a mirror for our world. And Mike already asked the $64,000 question. Are you talking about the 1830s or the 2030s? We're going to talk about his perception of the main problems of democracy, that is, say, of equality, and his proposed solutions to them. What he saw, how he saw Americans generating solutions to them. He thought that the first problem, the breaking of social bonds, they had addressed pretty well. The mania for material well-being had kind of generated some internal checks on it, but the restlessness of the mad scramble, he says it is what it is, and maybe things have not changed. Although when I taught this at Calvin to some honor students earlier this month, they thought that some things had fundamentally changed. So I'll be interested to see what you have to say about that. Now, before we get into the topic itself, I thought I'd draw back and give some consideration to Tocqueville's method of analysis, or his model of society. He was not a modern kind of sociologist that, created models and then did empirical research to verify or contradict the model, whatever. He was more intuitive. He was more philosophically and historically oriented. But essentially, this is the method and the model at work behind the pages of this book. There are 4 different layers you can trace through this book, 4 different areas of human activity that he sees at work. One is politics. Am I okay for the camera? Yeah, okay. One is politics, which we could call the system of rules. Under this is government, administration, and so forth. What we would look at as politics ourselves. Then there was the domain of society, which he sometimes, to us, maybe confusingly calls civil society. When we read the word civil, we think of politics, but that's not how he means it. He means civilized people not living in a state of barbarism, people who have come together and decided to get along in a more or less friendly manner, civility, civil society. And that's the domain, let's say, of human relations. Are people arrayed in a hierarchy or an equality? That's his big question. How do people get along? What are the rules, the formal and especially the informal rules? Then there's the domain of economy, which is the system of production and consumption. And then there's the domain of culture, which is the system of values, of norms, and ideas. And religion kind of, for him, belongs here, and that's fair enough. Now, what you want to have a real smoothly running society, you want these 4 domains to be in harmony. You want them to be more or less lining up. But who reads stories, who watches movies about good functioning people, right? We're interested in the problems. So the interest comes up when we see contradictions or tensions among these 4 levels, or layers. They all have feedback loops. So you want these to be aligned, but what happens when they're misaligned? That's his area of interest. given how much he talks about politics, particularly in the first half of this book in volume 1, you think that he sees this as the controlling sector. But to me, reading this and rereading it, for him, the two vital centers are society and culture. The way people relate to each other and the norms and values by which they try to regulate these relations. Politics is an expression of that. So democracy, notice, is a type of social relations, okay? Equality. That's what democracy is. It's not, first of all, elections and all the rest. That comes out of changes or new realities in society. But there are also values, norms, and ideas. The cultural sector and the society sector, social sector, have the first feedback loop. Politics then comes quite quickly out of that. One thing that strikes me that Tocqueville underplays is the realm of economy. And here one of his great successors, although not a follower or a fan, one of his great successors will make his name, and that's Karl Marx, who comes a generation later. For Karl Marx, everything fundamentally comes out of the economic sphere, modes of production and consumption. Who owns the means of production? Out of that, everything else, from that, everything else rattles down the board. For Tocqueville, the system or the situation of formal legal equality is the controlling factor, and everything rattles down the board from there. So, and yet, economics does play a big role in the changes that Tocqueville saw bringing about the situation of modern equality. Once upon a time, there were these aristocrats, these armed knights who owned all the land. And the culture and society and everything else was set up around that. But then commerce started to develop, and with that, towns and cities, the fabled bourgeoisie. And also on the side, there was the church with its own set of norms and values. Not martial values, not glorification, glory and the sword, but supposedly piety and love, right? Charity. So already in the Middle Ages, where he says that he exaggerates how nicely things lined up in the Middle Ages, there were tensions. But the engine of change came out of the economy. He doesn't talk about that much, although in the final week of our time together, he'll spy the emergence of a new industrial system, which he sees as a potentially big threat to democracy. So economy, the economic sector is kind of underplayed in his work, and Karl Marx will make a big splash by bringing that front and center and maybe a little monolithically, although Marx's followers subsequently got a lot more refined and subtle about how things work together. So when Tocqueville is looking at problems or tensions or so forth, just think about maybe this model where the tension is arising. These layers are grinding against each other. Okay. All right. So he says, remember, he starts out the book by saying, the first thing that struck me about America was the equality of condition. And everything else in this book comes out of that. Again, a wonderful topic sentence. Who are the English teachers here? There's one. Okay. Yeah, this is what we try to teach our students, right? You have a topic sentence that tells them what the paper, what the book, whatever is going to be about. And his 880 pages are about that topic sentence. Wonderful prose master. Okay. He says that, and he's writing again to his fellow French leaders, the elite in politics and culture and society. And he's saying, don't be like my dad and try to roll the clock back. There's no going back before the French Revolution. We can't undo that. God or destiny or fate or those slow-moving tectonic plates of history have brought in a situation of equality. And if you try to stop them, you're going to get ground down like you're trying to stop a glacier. So don't do that. What we want to do is try to figure out how this new society works. We want to try to discern what's good about it and what's not so good about it. And for that, I got this travel grant to go to America because they're the most advanced in this new system, and we'll see how it works. So, how it works and how it doesn't work. Tocqueville saw three major problems, areas of difficulty arising out of American society, the situation of equality. The one is the breaking of social bonds. The second is the mania for well-being. And the third is this insatiable restlessness. The PowerPoint today is nothing fancy. It's simply some of the real money quotes that I find in Tocqueville. The one last week was not only the topic sentence, but also that note that I wrote this book in a state of religious terror, you know? So here are the money quotes from these different problems today. That's what I'm going to be putting on the board. So first of all, the breaking of social bonds. How and why does this happen? So I'm afraid this is going to go by the board. You've doubtless memorized it. It will be on the final exam. So don't worry about it. Back in the day, let me get a better one here. In the Middle Ages, he said, when the Tocquevilles helped rule the world, society was arrayed as a hierarchy. This is aristocracy. A situation of inequality, legal inequality, social inequality, power, political power and economic power gravitated to the top. Everybody else was below. And he said, this had some benefits, it had some virtues, but it also had some defects. And in any case, it's on the way out. But the good thing about this old aristocracy was that there was a place for everything and everything was in its place. Okay? This was rich in connectivity. There were relationships among people. Aristocrats had noblesse oblige, the obligation of the nobility to care for their lessers. And the people who were lesser gave deference to their betters. We're not talking with better and lesser here about moral qualities. We're talking about the better people in society, as they were regarded, and the lower people in society. So noblesse oblige exchanged with deference, and the system supposedly hummed along nicely. Not only in social space, but there was also connectivity over time. And this is something that maybe doesn't get enough notice in Tocqueville, but it really haunts him. And it will come out in the eternal restlessness of the Americans. With aristocrats, they knew their forebears and they could virtually see their descendants. And they felt obligated. Noblesse oblige just didn't go down the scale. It also went back and forth in time. So I have an obligation to live up to what my forefathers and foremothers perhaps established. And I have an obligation to pass this along, this noble heritage along, maybe purged and improved to my descendants. Now we are in the new realm where everybody's supposedly equal. So connections up and down. If we would bring one of these people out, it may be an individual, it may be a family, we would see a very tight and supposedly self-sufficient circle. This is a situation of isolation and fragmentation. This is the modern condition. And this is perhaps one of the causes of his religious terror. How in the world are these people going to get along? One way is to bring in a strong man, a despot, to make sure they behave and align them together. That's what the French did right after the revolution with Napoleon. But that didn't work. So what might work? This is the problem that really, I think, haunts Tocqueville in looking at the emerging society more than any others. So this is on the bottom of at the end of chapter 2 of volume 2, part 2. As conditions are equalized, one finds a greater number of individuals who, not being wealthy enough or powerful enough to exert a great influence over the fates of those like them, have nevertheless acquired or preserved enough enlightenment and goods to be able to be self-sufficient. Emerson, call your office, right? Self-reliance. These owe nothing to anyone and expect nothing from anyone. They are in the habit of always considering themselves in isolation, and they willingly fancy that their whole destiny is in their hands. I don't need you, and I don't need God. I am a rock, you know, and I'm the master of my fate. Thus, not only, and this is one of those haunting money quotes out of Tocqueville, thus, not only does democracy make each person forget his ancestors, it hides his descendants from him and separates him from his contemporaries. It constantly leads him back toward himself alone and threatens finally to confine him wholly in the solitude of his own heart. Every time I read this, I feel the impact of it. He occasionally rises to really find rhetorical power in just nailing the situation. So the threat is isolation. The threat is the breaking of social bonds. What can come out of that is me imperializing over you. I see all these other random atoms around me. I want to control them. I want to acquire them. I want to dominate them. Or I don't feel up to that, so I surrender my possibilities. I surrender self-control to a despot, a tyrant above me who can hold it all together. Here he's kind of evoking the political philosophy of Thomas Hobbes, right? Wrote the time of the grave English Civil War, saw society of a war as a war of each against all. Lives becoming nasty, solitary, brutish, and short. People can't live that way. Therefore, they must, says Hobbes, give over their sovereignty, their rule of their lives to Leviathan, the great majesty on the throne. Tocqueville doesn't quote Hobbes here, but I think he has an echo of that. In the wake of the French Revolution, we have something similar to the wake of the English Revolution of the 1640s. Isolation with imperiousness alternating with cowardice or fear. This is no way for people to live. So what is the solution to the situation? I found it in America, says Tocqueville. It is a nation of joiners. Come to Papa. There used to be a lot more to that slide. Okay. The text somehow got lost. Voluntary associations. America as a nation of joiners. Right? You heard that maybe when you were young. And now the problem in our society, our situation is that we're all bowling alone, to take the negative echo or the contrasting echo of that. Okay, so let me try to supply what the slide has taken away. So as he toured, especially the New England diaspora, and his emphasis on voluntary associations here might be, I think it certainly was actually, modified by this or conditioned by his hanging around with descendants of New England, where the town was the organizing unit in society. You could not move into colonial Massachusetts or Connecticut unless you were accepted as a member of a town. You could not come into that area, just buy a plot of property and set up shop like you could in the South or in the Middle Atlantic colonies. In classic New England, you had to be accepted as a member of a town and sign the town covenant to be accepted. Okay, so this communal thickness, this communal gravity carries over with these New Englanders as they go along the Erie Canal and out to lower Michigan and upper Indiana and so forth. It's a nation of joiners. And particularly conservative commentators in the middle of the 20th century made a big point of this. They lauded Tocqueville for seeing these voluntary associations, and they lauded the principle of voluntary association as the real salvation of America in their world, the 1950s, the 1960s, amid the emergence of big business, big labor, and especially big government. Conservatives, back then anyway, were really leery of big government. How can we avoid that? How can we solve the problems of society without government intervention? Let's return to Tocqueville's America, where people joined up to solve problems among themselves. And he was, was in great contrast to what was going on in France. Tocqueville was really amazed by this. He picks out an interesting case in point. What we would call the American, what was called the American Temperance Society. He did not label it as such, but that was the operation of a voluntary association founded in 1825 to try to bring the problem of overconsumption of alcohol under control. And in 20 years, it reduced the level of drinking by about 80%. I haven't looked at these stats for a while. Maybe there've been updated ones, but by my calculation, I like to bring this out for undergraduates. By my calculation, the average in 1820, the average American consumer of alcohol, which was any male 15 years or older, put away about 3/5 a week. So I don't know if any of you, certainly not the ladies here, any of you gentlemen ever pounded a 1/2 a night. Yeah, you don't want to do it regularly. But I mean, you don't want to drink the water back then, right? And so you go to work and you have a shot. You don't have coffee at break, you have a shot. At lunch, 2 shots. Mid-afternoon, a shot. At the end of the day, you celebrate the end of the workday with a shot. Then you go home and have a few more shots. People were just really hammering at the alcohol. And in 20, 25 years, that rate of consumption was reduced by 80%. And this was all on a voluntary basis, persuasion, traveling lecturers, and so forth. And he said, Tocqueville says, when I first heard about this, I laughed at it. And then I saw the results. There was a major problem, and Americans voluntarily working together have not put an end to it, but have really reduced the problem. It's amazing. And look at the way they start businesses, and look at the way they begin hospitals, and look at the way they reform the prisons. And in every domain of society and culture, they didn't wait for government to do it or call on government to do it. They got together and did it themselves. Hooray. This brings people together. Now, what the conservatives of the mid-20th century didn't bring out so much was that this comes about, first of all, from political action. Because mid-20th century conservatives thought government was kind of a problem. So we don't want to talk about politics. We'll talk about people voluntary association, bringing together through voluntary association. But how did they get involved with each other? Where did they learn to trust each other? Where did they discover their competence to solve a problem together? Well, it was out of politics. And so there's political organization on the local level that taught people that they could do this and that they could do it well. So politics, political association is the first thing that brings people together. And then they learn to do all these other things. A great example out of early Grand Rapids history. I wrote a book on that. I don't know Holland's history as well, but the first federal judge appointed in Grand Rapids was Solomon Withy, appointed by Abraham Lincoln. But more interesting, so that's formal politics. His wife, Marion Hinsdale, was the daughter of the family in whose hotel the first Congregational Church of Grand Rapids was founded. Now Park Church, right next to the Grand Rapids Public Library downtown, okay? She also went to London, studied with Florence Nightingale, and began Grand Rapids' first hospital. Later Spectrum, now Corewell or whatever. Focus groups, you know, right? You can tell the names come from focus groups. She also founded the Grand Rapids Public Library. So the men are in charge of the politics, but women are getting together and through voluntary cooperation, founding these benevolent associations for education, for healthcare, for welfare, so on and so forth. This family, by the way, came right out of Rochester, descended out of colonial Connecticut. So these are Yankees supreme. Boy, I really miss this one I had on this slide. Local. Yeah, this voluntary association is taught by political activism, political engagement. And these voluntary associations kind of work to replace the old aristocracy. Because another virtue in the old aristocracy was that you had power concentrated at one point that could get things done. And that could stand up to the despot, to the king, right? The nobles are the king's enemies because the political power, they're jockeying for political power between them. So the nobles are a concentrated point of power that can get things done and that can preserve liberty. That's what voluntary associations are in America. You concentrate enough individuals, you create power, and you can ward off evil things. One other point at this juncture that might be a little bit of a logical contradiction to us, or seem a little bit of a logical contradiction. These associations are vital to the preservation of liberty. But what is liberty to Tocqueville? It is not, most decidedly not, what some people in our society say it is today. My right to be left alone and not have the government tell me anything. I get to run, I stand on my own ground. I get to do what I want to do as long as I don't impinge on anybody else. I am a sovereign individual. That is Tocqueville's nightmare. That is this. That is isolation and lack of social bondedness. What liberty is for him is the right, the privilege, the duty to participate in politics. Liberty means political participation. It means dedication or commitment, engagement in the res publica, the public thing. You see it as a root word of the republic. Liberty is political engagement. That's what brings people together. And then they generate these other associations that keeps them glued together. We might think, we often hear again, that liberty is the sovereign individual's right to do his or her own thing. Whereas equality is seen as a government project that threatens liberty by mandating measures that keep people equal. For Tocqueville, it's the opposite. Liberty is the right and the duty to participate in public affairs. Equality creates sovereign, lonely, competitive, anarchic individuals. Okay, so this is a little bit of a mind bender. Here's how Tocqueville's America is different from ours. At least his political idea, his political picture is different from ours. Okay. This is what brings people together. What keeps them together? What creates community? Look at the common root word here, communication. Communication creates community. And the most important form of communication, the one that just stunned Tocqueville, was the newspaper. And it is true that he was right to be stunned. The United States had more newspapers than all other countries in the world put together. It was just, it's partly because of the Postal Service that could distribute these papers. The United States was a pioneer there, or at least brought the model to completion. It is through a common mode of communication that we feel feel sustained in a community. And at this point, my students are right there. They're jumping all over it because you maybe saw the news over the weekend that many more mass layoffs at American newspapers. Los Angeles Times, I think, laid off 20% of their staff. A bunch of online magazines are going to the wall or getting acquired by other ones. The newspaper, outside of a couple of the big dailies like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, Washington Post lost a lot of money last year. Good thing that Jeff Bezos is so rich. I mean, if he can afford a $500 million yacht, Jeff Bezos, if he can afford a $500 million yacht, he can take a little hit owning the Washington Post. But still, this is not a good sign that one of the nation's 3 leading newspapers runs at a constant and a significant deficit. So if newspapers are going to the wall, and if they are vital for creating these associations, and the associations are vital for keeping the society working, what of our future? Half of the students in my class will say, oh, social media. Social media brings people together. Well, yeah, okay. And the other half will say, yeah, but it creates echo chambers. Well, a lot of these newspapers back in his day were echo chambers too. Virtually all these newspapers were either owned and run either by a religious denomination or a political party. If you want detached, objective journalism in politics, don't go back to the papers of this time. They're screamingly Democratic or they're screamingly Whig, now with capital D and capital W. They are as partisan as you can imagine. They make Fox News seem kind of temperate. Okay, so they had echo chambers back then too. But the importance of the local scene for Tocqueville. People felt competent and they felt empowered. They felt they had agency, as the buzzword is today, because they were working on a common local problem and they could get something done. Tocqueville says, please don't start on the national level. You're going to be ineffective there. Well, social media is on a global level. And so I think I can see maybe a cause of some of the cynicism and despair in my students, because they are all revved up about all these terrible things going on in the world, and they register their good opinion. They signal their virtue by going on social media and says, oh, I hate that too. But that guy really sucks. And then nothing changes. Nothing changes. So Tocqueville is talking about not just the newspapers, but the act of reading them communally, face to face, and having bonds knit in the immediate proximity to each other. Virtual community he would say is no community at all. I think he would say, not that I have opinion on this, that online church is no church at all. It's getting together with these other people, warts and all, that teach perseverance, teach persistence, and teach the virtue of charity. So anyway, is Tocqueville's America ours? Well, what kept his America together is going to the wall. And the threat that he saw of isolation, of loneliness, is rising to the point, I said this last week, where the Surgeon General of the United States says that loneliness, isolation, is one of the top public health problems in the United States today. So, boys and girls, are we doomed? So what did you think? And this is a very un-Dutch thing. How did you feel? No, Dutch people feel, they just don't talk about it, right? But no, what did you think? And how did you feel as you read these pages in Tocqueville? They kind of come off the page and kind of haunt me and make me worry. Yeah.
I kept looking for him to say something about
Oh,
Can you repeat the question?
No,
yeah.
no, all right.
Okay. For the tape,
Sorry. Oh,
for the
people
people
at
at home.
home.
Yeah.
I kept looking through the two readings we've done so far for de Tocqueville's view on what I think most of us were taught way back at the beginning of our country, these First Amendment rights. And he never, maybe I missed it.
Well, I didn't assign it. He goes into the political arrangements and the Constitution and so forth in the volume 1 that I kind of passed over. So if you're interested in this, and I don't think it's unimportant, I just, I only have.
Drive isolation, or do they drive democracy?
Do they drive isolation or do that is the Constitution is a formal framework under which people try to live together. So the formal arrangements of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and so forth just set up the arena in which we then gather to play the game. So, pardon me? Yeah, the rules of the game, but who organizes the teams and what do they fight for? That happens on the level of society and culture, he would say. Okay, somebody else. Yeah.
I'm thinking about the ways that people came to places like Cedar Grove, Iowa, Pella, Iowa, and Holland, Michigan.
Mhm.
In a lot of cases, it would be right in the 1840s that these groups began flowing in. A lot of times they might not have come if it were not for solid land titles. They knew the land had been securely obtained and legally obtained, as they saw it, from the Indians, that it was laid out in plots and that their lot lines would hold up if they came.
Mhm.
Because many of them were coming with money. They were not necessarily the tired and the poor huddled masses. They
Right.
were middle-class families bringing not only all their sons with them, but all of their money, selling everything back home. My grandfather came with $600, which was a fortune at that time. You wouldn't put that into land unless you knew that your title was
Right.
secure. And how is a farmer back in the Netherlands with only so much land going to give each of his children a farm? He's not going to do that. But here, it was the only place in the world where by 1860 with the Homestead Act, a man could get an acre of land for $1, which was the typical wages of a man for a day. Where in the world could you buy an acre of land for what you could earn in one day? It was just a complete revolution that fits right into Tocqueville, except the Dutch people were still clinging to this idea that if they had land, then they had the ability to provide
Mhm.
for their families. even if they were somewhat prosperous back home on a relative basis, they were still doing that. So the security of the land titles was important to them. It may be as important as being more free for their legit religious
Yeah,
expression.
so yeah, in John Locke's philosophy, right? Three inalienable rights are life, liberty, and property. And property is the basis of liberty. But is your property secure? Yes, legally it is, and that's really important. It's, dependability, but do you have enough? Do you want more? This feeds into the next problem we're going to talk about. Yeah. Or my mother came from Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Will your ship get you safely to harbor? Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, I think it would be an interesting study for some Calvin students or Hope students to look at. Who came in 1848? Who came boldly enough that they knew about the Phoenix, but they came anyway, because the Phoenix did stall immigration for about 10 years, just the fear of
Mhm.
people back home. So only those who were not looking at one immediate danger, but looking ahead and behind more, like a Tocqueville kind of looking forward and backward.
Yeah. The confidence